So how do we get from buzzwords to effective regeneration? Quite the topic of the day. I think critically, you've got to put people's voices at the heart of change and really level with them that we're now in the era of trade-offs, whether that's on climate change, the COVID recovery, and what that should look like in each place. The answer is different. There is no template. There is no lifting of an approach and a solution and putting it in another and thinking that, well, that will just work, because it probably won't. So how do you do that? Yes, you can do great things like citizens' assemblies, but also things at a smaller level around participatory budgeting with small pots of money to start off with, where you're really letting people truly have a say in how things are done, what the priorities are, where that money goes locally, and just showing actually that you're working in a different way with your community. So again, really putting their voices at the heart of change. I think that will be how you really get from buzzwords to truly regenerated places.
A successful and sustainable economy has to be one that works for people wherever they live and whatever their background. That means supporting the small businesses that create good jobs and real opportunities for local people, that generate new ideas and innovations, that compete with the big multinationals to give consumers real choice, and that are so key to helping our local communities and high streets thrive. It means taking real climate action now, not just to avert disaster, but also to make the UK the world leader in so many of the clean industries of the future, as we did with offshore wind. And it means investing in education and skills, the human capital that is every bit as vital to our economic future as buildings, bridges, and other infrastructure. I hope the awfulness of the upheaval of COVID will change things, and I hope in education it will mark a watershed in how we think about educating our children and young people. Education is so crucial for tackling inequality, creating opportunity, and growing our economy long into the future. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jonathan Warren, Chief Executive of the Place think tank Localis. We're balancing Whitehall's outdated and not too effective command and control model with local initiatives. Means we don't have a lot of time for constitutional assemblies and the like, but a better form of central-local relations, maybe mandating them through a green paper, one founded on mutual trust, if not respect, might not be a bad place to start in rebalancing. For economic and social renewal, creating a kind of mezzanine level for financing for sub-regional investment would be a just right Goldilocks solution for getting money out quicker and faster. And although the spending review sets out a good tone for better resourcing of the local state, greater autonomy for social infrastructure, using double devolution to ensure communities get their say in local areas in shaping local destinies, will also pay dividends.
Hello, my name is Jane Robinson and I'm the Pro-Vice-Chancellor of Engagement and Place for Newcastle University. And I'm here at COP26 in Glasgow, where we've been looking at the opportunities of the green economy. And there is no doubt that there are some fantastic innovations and exciting opportunities. But when we think about regeneration and renewal, it's important that we think not just about a more sustainable economy in the future, but also one that is more inclusive. And to achieve that, we need to make sure that those innovations that we're driving for the future of the economy are connected to local people through skills. As a university, we are working with our local partners not just to drive forward those innovations, but also to make sure that we are supporting those skills pathways, working with schools and colleges to make sure that people of all ages and backgrounds can access those jobs of the future.
I'm among the small minority of people who believe that the supply-side approach set out in your conference agenda on its own will not make any real difference to our productivity and growth problems or our national imbalances. In my view, we will never get productivity up without more investment, and this will never happen unless we have an exchange rate policy which makes it profitable to invest in manufacturing industry in the UK rather than elsewhere. It is very largely because the UK exchange rate is far too high for manufacturing that our economic growth record is so poor. If misplaced exchange rate policies are arguably the biggest single reason why the UK has such a productivity problem, should this possibility not at least be on your agenda?
The decline of left behind areas dates back 200 years, with low-skilled inward migration during the Industrial Revolution, then outward migration of the highly educated as industry collapsed. And we've then had positive and negative feedback loops for different areas. And now we need to focus on human capital, attracting it, retaining it, and creating it locally. And this requires culture in its broadest sense. What makes a place worth living in? The aesthetics of buildings, schools, low crime, arts, greenery, and also brand, because status is such a potent human motivator, and a move to Rustville is not a high status move. Transport also important to increase the effective pool of jobs, so you're more likely to be able to find jobs for both husband and wife, and another job if the first fails. And let's incentivize the private sector to deliver this by government sharing future financial gains. And the Bank of England could offer QE support with infrastructure bonds. It's going to need a combinatorial approach, each measure on its own not sufficient, and the impact analysis needs to be sensitive to this if we're going to get to this virtuous circle of place nurturing people, nurturing place.
Hello to everybody at the Radix Big Tent Festival. It's great to hear that you're discussing levelling up and regeneration today. I think at the heart of this agenda needs to be a modern manufacturing renaissance for a number of reasons. Firstly, it would provide good jobs to those industrial areas who have been ignored for so long. Secondly, it's crucial to productivity because you won't get the productivity gains the UK economy needs in services. Thirdly, it's crucial for climate change. We have to shorten supply chains if we're going to cut carbon emissions.
Good way of buying our time with some really good sort of introductory comments to get us started. And it seems to me there is nowhere better to start than with our first speaker. He is the inspiration and driving force behind Big Tent, and we wouldn't be here without him. And he is going to be introducing our program for the day. He is a man who's passionate, it seems to me, about delivering real change for local communities, an incredibly hard-working champion for his own constituency of Mid-Norfolk, the author of the government's recent report on innovation, growth and regulatory reform, a minister in the last three governments, I believe, Minister of Life Sciences, then for Transport, and now Minister for Science, Research and Innovation, the founder of Big Tent. Please join me in welcoming George Freeman.
Ben, thank you. I'm fond of saying to friends, I can't work out whether I'm in the twilight of my political career or the foothills. And it's a sign of the pace of the political turmoil and the scale of the turmoil that Stephen and I and other colleagues in the House are trying to do our jobs whilst straddling, that the last 11 years have seemed to have flown by in both 11 months and they seem like a century. It seems unbelievable to think that it was only 11 years that the coalition was forming. Nick Clegg and David Cameron were forming a coalition. It seems as though we've been through 50 years of politics in the last 10 years. And I'm so pleased to be here kicking this off today. Ben, thank you for your introduction. And can I just first of all welcome you all and thank you for coming. Politics is, as I've discovered, 90% perspiration and 10% inspiration. And it is 100% presence. If you're not in the room, if you're not shaping the conversation, if you're not actually meeting and greeting and doing the change, being the change, then the change will happen to you. So convening you as leaders from all around the country, convening you here with leaders of policy making here in Westminster is our absolute bread and butter. And it's just really good to see so many of you here. It is a leaders summit. It's 100 or so of you, not thousands. It's because we want to get the real leaders from the front line together to talk to the real leaders here in policy and help to drive this conversation forward. So thank you for coming and signalling your support. And a very, very warm welcome to colleagues from all parties. Stephen, and I'm looking for a Liberal Democrat colleague. I know there are lots here. But also those of you of no party. And what the Big Tent, there he is. What the Big Tent is trying to do is create a safe space for people from strong and proud political traditions to come together with conviction and with philosophy and with all the things that drive us into doing politics, with those people who don't want to belong to a political tribe but do want to solve some problems. And it's been my contention from the beginning that that is a rich space, a rich forum. If we could create a genuine Big Tent as we've done, both physically in those wonderful festivals where people can come and think beyond the boxes of traditional policymaking, think outside the box and work together on topics and in ways that are fresh, then we can also build a politics that will inspire a new generation without rejecting our philosophies and our principles, in fact strengthening them. And there is nothing more strengthening of trust in politics than hearing people from different traditions debate civilly and with great respect for each other's traditions, the traditions that they come from. And it's in that spirit that the Big Tent tries to make a difference. And I'm very struck that remembering why and how we set this up in 2017, it was triggered really by two things. Firstly, the appalling murder of Joe Cox, which was for me, as I'm sure it was for you, the absolute low moment of my entire interest in politics from the age of 15. When an MP is murdered, something I never thought we'd see again, and to stand here and have to share with you the fact that another MP has been murdered in the last few months tells us everything we need to know about the scale of what's gone wrong in our political discourse. And Big Tent was formed, in my mind, partly the afternoon of Joe's murder, but also through that referendum as one saw a release of a clearly deeply felt and pent-up tension, but it manifested in a pretty unhealthy debate, a very visceral, polarized, aggressive, angry political explosion. And somehow politicians, we, all of us, have got to put the pieces back together and create a politics that can tackle the deep causes of those frustrations, but in a way that can carry out political discourse in a way that's safe, first and foremost, but also effective, and actually in the carrying out of that politics can bring our society and our community back together. That shouldn't need saying, but it does. And I wanted just to remind you, that was the founding instinct of Big Tent. We've been on a journey through the 4 festivals, the first in Reading, where we tried and piloted the idea. 300 of you came, 3 tents, and 300 of you said, do it again and make it bigger and have more tents. Then we went to Cambridge. We had 12 tents and 1,500 people and some wonderful feedback. People saying to have the science tent next to the arts tent was brilliant. And it reminded us all that science and arts are 2 sides of the same coin, imagining a better future and coming at the challenges that we face from different traditions, but with a similar appetite. Then we went to Mudshoot in the lee of the City of London to discuss whether the answer to our problems is to drive capitalism out of the City of London and the UK, or to harness the best of that incredible square mile and spread it around the country. Then we had to postpone because of COVID, and then this year we went to Coventry to signal our commitment to really get beyond the Westminster bubble, beyond the village, and start to really help those people in places that want not just to be part of a new conversation, but to benefit from that conversation and to see better policy making to drive that real reform to shape and transform life chances. And it was a joy that year, earlier this summer, to see so many of you there, but also to see the Secretary of State for Business, Innovation and Industrial Strategy, the 2 Labour and Conservative mayoral candidates from the West Midlands, joined in their passion for that part of the world, colleagues from all parties and none, and local entrepreneurs. And what was fascinating, I thought, was that as well as seeing the above-the-line Coventry West Midlands cluster, the battery technologies, the Jaguar Land Rover supply chain, the net zero major infrastructure, we also saw the incredible dynamism of that largely BAME digital cluster gaming community of almost invisible entrepreneurs who are developing incredible technologies that are actually vital to tomorrow's healthcare, but also to tomorrow's digital economy. And giving a voice and a platform to those often invisible youngsters who are below the line in the Coventry cluster and bringing them out into the mainstream, I thought was a really important part of what we did. And that is now our mission. And today is a really important moment. It's our first Leaders Summit with Radix, our think tank partner. And our mission over the next 3 years is to catalyse, convene, and lead this debate. What is it that we really have to do if we're going to deliver some of the promises on the sides of buses and election manifestos and leaflets, to really change the life chances of people who felt left behind by an old politics and an old economy? What are the lessons from successful regeneration? We went to Mudchute because the city, that incredible Docklands regeneration was an accident. It was supposed to be warehousing. Nobody thought that it would be a housing and city cluster triggered by Big Bang. So the accidentalism in regeneration is really important. The role of creative arts. Many of the places that people now would most want to buy a second home were artist hideaways in the 1920s and 1910s because they were cheap. Silicon Valley started as a hippie commune. So the role of arts and culture in changing the way places think about themselves is a really important part of what we're about. And I wanted just to take this opportunity to thank Sally Morgan, who has been a rock of support. When I set this up, I wanted to signal loud and clear this was not an enlightened piece of Tory outreach politics. This is genuinely a commitment to non-partisan politics. And Sally, Baroness Morgan, Master Fitzwilliam, has been a great supporter, and she stood back but has been ably replaced by Anna Turley. And Anna, it's great to have you with us and to have so many colleagues from all parties here today. On levelling up, I'd just say this. I don't think anyone can fault the Prime Minister and the government for the scale of the ambition. I think the challenge we all face is how do we make sure that that ambition is actually delivered and that it doesn't lead actually to disillusionment at more broken promises from Westminster. And it seems to me that actually the real challenge, if you look at what levelling up has got to really do, yes, it's got to be about connectivity and trains and buses and digital. Yes, it's got to be about skills. Yes, it's got to be about innovation and enterprise. But most importantly, it has to be about changing the way people in places that have been left behind think of themselves, empower themselves, and take control of their own destiny. There is something profound about powerlessness that leads to a cycle of powerlessness and emigration of talent. And it's tackling that, which I'm really pleased to see Neil O'Brien, now the Minister for Levelling Up, put right at the heart of this. He's made very clear this isn't just about some buses, some digital connectivity, the odd factory. It's about tackling the postcode lottery, which means that your life chances in this country are fundamentally shaped by where you grew up. It's wrong, it's structural, systemic, cultural. It's been in our system for decades, and it has to be tackled. So the levelling up agenda is huge. It's not going to be solved in 3 or 4 or 5 years. But it seems to me we have to deliver some tangible progress. And that's really what this Big Tent Radix work stream in the next 3 years is all about. Making sure that we actually think about the economies, people and places around the country. I'd go so far as to say there is no such thing as the economy. That's a spreadsheet in the Treasury. The economy is made up of thousands of little economies all around the country. Economies of place, economies of people and sector. And if we can get those economies moving, we'll get the economy moving. And I'd just close with this observation, that it seems to me that fundamental to really transformational change is culture. And the real culture is a culture of empowerment, of belief, of ambition, of optimism. And if you go to places that have been left behind, typically one of the big problems has been that people with ambition for that place have tended to feel they had to leave to make stuff happen. And creating the conditions in which people can see that they can make a difference, there are opportunities in their locations, is fundamental. And it is a great pleasure to be here, Ben, as Minister for Science, Research and Innovation. I can tell you right now, I'm in the process of taking a historic science and R&D budget increase and asking my department, how do we put people and place at the heart of this? Let's not just announce an awful lot of infrastructure and a lot of silos and a lot of funds. How do we really help the Northeast economy blossom? How do we help the East Anglia economy, the Southwestern economy, the Bristol economy? And on that note, I'm really delighted that Ben, the Mayor of Bristol, is going to be joining us later on to announce that we're taking the festival to Bristol next year. And thank you all for coming. Thank you for this afternoon, because the work is yet to be done in the workshops that Ben and his team have put together. It's an inspiring and exciting way of doing politics, and thank you for being here.
Thank you very much, George. And I don't know if I misheard you or if you coined intentionally or unintentionally the idea of Radix as your think tent partner. But actually, I think that's really spot on, because what we want to be is a place that not only there's discussion, but there's ideas, and really exciting ideas come out of those discussions. And that's what we're going to be looking to capture this afternoon in the breakout sessions, which you will lead. Just before we do, we're going to turn to our partner for today's summit. We were really, really excited when TPX Impact said that they wanted to work with us on today's summit, not least because they are already working across the whole of government. But they're also, it seems to me, really serious thought leaders. And you know, if you were in doubt of that, you'll have seen from our first film today the contribution from Claire Hazelgrove, their Director of Community and Engagement. So they are people who share our passion for coming with original ideas. And I'm going to ask Neil Gandhi, as their CEO and co-founder, to say just a few words about their involvement.
Thank you. And actually, as somebody that moved away from Coventry to find the opportunity in London, I absolutely agree. I think we have to find the opportunities for people where they grew up and where they lived. So I'm Neil Gandhi. I'm the CEO of TPX Impact. Really pleased to be headline sponsors for today. We're a company listed on the London Stock Exchange. We're only 3 years old. We're about 1,000 people, or approaching 1,000 people. And as such, we're one of the fastest growing technology companies, technology and change services companies in the UK. So really delighted to be here. Many of you won't have heard of us. I guess that's because we're so new, but we're pretty committed to make sure you will have heard of us, certainly in the next few years. With 75% of our revenue coming from UK public services, we work in partnership with the civil service across central government, local government, and health to deliver technology-led frontline services and helping put people's voices at the heart of change. As we enter into 2022, the need to deliver for those left behind has never been more urgent. The legacy and ongoing challenges related to both the pandemic and Brexit and the resulting economic dislocation has created a sense that there's even more disparity now than there was in 2019. And it's only through sharing ideas across and between sectors, politics, business, not-for-profits and community, that we'll be able to meet the challenges and seize the opportunities facing us both now and in the future. At TPX Impact, we're convinced that part of the answer to meeting these challenges is the ability to think more boldly than ever before. As a company that focuses on using technology, design, and community engagement to rapidly create great outcomes in the public sector, we've experienced firsthand how much of a drain systemic inertia can be. And there really is a huge amount of systemic inertia. When we try and drive the change that we really believe in, we come up against blocks all the time of people who say you can't do it, and we're completely convinced that we can. When we come across those that are willing to think more creatively and across people who are willing to take calculated risks, we know that meaningful change can happen. Whether that's creating a rural payment system that actually works while saving the taxpayer tens of millions of pounds per year, or delivering a home testing service at the beginning of the pandemic so NHS workers could return to work faster, and doing that in a matter of days. Or if it's engaging communities through climate assemblies to help decide on the trade-offs required to tackle the climate crisis. We know that real impactful change is absolutely possible because we have delivered it. But it can only happen if we're willing to discard the old processes and embrace the opportunities that modern ways of working embrace, which means dropping the inertia. As Grace Hopper, computing pioneer and US naval officer, famously said, the most dangerous phrase in the language is, "We've always done it this way." And that would appear to be the problem that we face as we look to help those most in need. To quote another amazing woman, this time Madeleine Albright, we're taking 21st century challenges, evaluating them with 20th century ideas, and responding with 19th century tools. It's not quite that bad, but believe me, from the front line, it's not far off. So we're looking forward to being part of these conversations today and hearing what you all have to say. These conversations, this bold thinking, truly matter, and we're delighted to take part. I know that there are going to be some fantastic sessions today. We invite you to select and join our workshops as a couple that we're running, learning from the pandemic and looking to the future. The first of these is focused on how community power can help shape the solutions needed to tackle the big challenges ahead. And the second will look at how we can keep that spirit of risk and innovation alive as we go through to move to more effective regeneration. You know, we delivered some incredible projects through the pandemic, often in days and weeks, things that historically would have taken years to push through at a time when everybody pulled together to truly create answers at a real time in need. And you know, we're convinced that if we can harness that and keep hold of that, we can keep on delivering at the kind of pace that we've become used to. So thank you for listening. I hope that to meet many of you during the course of the day and perhaps later in the evening as well. And I hope you all enjoy the conversations that you're about to have. Thank you.
Thank you, Leah, and thank you for helping our event to happen today. It's very much appreciated. So we now move to the first of two plenary sessions to really begin to try and explore that issue. And we've already heard from a Conservative minister, and now it's time to hear from the Labour side. And for that, I'm going to hand over to my friend Fiona Miller. Fiona is a journalist, a writer, a campaigner. I was honoured to work with her on the ultimately successful campaign to introduce mixed-sex civil partnerships. She worked at Number 10 under Tony Blair and is now a critical friend, I think, of the Labour Party, sometimes more friendly, sometimes more critical. And Fiona, I'm going to hand over to you to introduce our next session, our speaker.
Okay. Sorry. I'm going to invite my interviewee to come up, and you'll see that this isn't actually Steve Reed, it's Stephen Kinnock.
One Steve is more or less the same as another, yeah.
But I am delighted to be interviewing Stephen, who I've known for a very long time, since he was at school, I think. But I won't let that get in the way of my interview. For those of you who don't know, I mean, Stephen is the co-host of this event. He's also the MP for Aberavon. He's Labour's front bench spokesman on Asia and the Pacific. And he's had a varied career before politics, starting in the European Parliament, through the British Council, World Economic Forum, and a role in private business too. Now, you probably won't want me to open the conversation this way, but I have to acknowledge the fact that you are also the child of two very prominent politicians.
Indeed.
Your father was the leader of the Labour Party, and your mother was a well-known MEP. You're also married to the former Prime Minister of Denmark, so you know a bit about politics, and also about winning and losing and power. So what is your answer to the question? What is Labour's levelling up?
Well, I have a personal view on that, which is based on three words. I'm reminiscent of Tony Blair's famous education, education, education. I think that it should be about manufacturing, manufacturing, and manufacturing. I think that when you look at the fundamental problems at the heart of the British economy, you can trace them all back to the collapse of our manufacturing sector. In the 1970s, manufacturing accounted for about 30% of our GDP. It's now at about 9%. That collapse has led to the exodus of resources and talent and wealth from the parts of the country that I think we're focusing on today to London and the southeast. It's led for a tilt from export to import and from production to consumption. And those fundamental problems are what have created this force that's ripped through the communities that we've seen in the South Wales valleys, in the north and the Midlands of England, that has destroyed the social fabric in many ways, led to high streets going down the tubes and led to that sense of a narrative of decline. So I think what we're here today is to talk about what are the priorities in terms of addressing those fundamental issues. And I think that whichever way you look at it, all roads lead back to the collapse of manufacturing as the cause of the problem. So then it's a question about how you rebuild that manufacturing sector. What does your industrial strategy look like? What are the policies that you need to put in place to make it happen? And I'm sure we can get onto that. But I think in a nutshell, I think that the Labour Party should be making a very bold promise, which would be that a Labour government would get our share of manufacturing in terms of GDP from 9% to 15% within one parliamentary term.
Do you think that's a very relatable idea? I mean, you know, do you see that as the kind of elevator pitch for Labour?
I think...
Or does it have to be more in terms of people's lives? You know, that's something that Boris Johnson obviously does quite well, is to tell a story to people.
Yeah, I think...
And I think some people feel at the moment Labour hasn't really got a story.
I think the story is around jobs. So I think if you say to people, this is the way in which we're going to provide good jobs that you can raise a family on, and we talk, I think we need to talk with much more passion and conviction about the dignity of labour. It's not just about the paycheck at the end of the month. It's that sense of pride and self-esteem, being proud of putting food on the table for your family, about being part of something bigger.
Sorry,
the mic's not working.
Tell Fiona that her mic is off.
Oh. Can you hear me?
We can't hear you. They can't hear you online.
Oh no. Oh, okay. Well, do you want to,
Can someone help maybe with the mic and get it switched on?
Carry on, Stephen. You carry on because
Yeah.
your mic's on.
Well, it was just about, I think that what really resonates with people is good work and good jobs, and the dignity and the sense of what it brings to your sense of identity and defining who you are. And actually, that, you know, the clue is in the name for the Labour Party. We are the Labour Party. We are the party of work and good jobs. And I think there's a real dividing line between ourselves and the Conservatives, frankly, because I think that people do see the Conservatives as being part of this race to the bottom and, you know, the prevalence of 0 hours contracts and this huge shift we've seen in our economy away from manufacturing to financial services in London and the South East, and to more low-paid, low-value-added services, such as Amazon warehouses in the rest of the country that's replaced our manufacturing sector. I think there's also something that we should be talking about in terms of a Britain that can stand more firmly on its own 2 feet. Actually, what is that post-Brexit vision for the future of the country? And that also has to be about reducing our reliance on supply chains, importing pretty much everything that we need from countries like China. I think there's a lot of people in the communities that we're talking about today that don't like that. They think that model doesn't work, and it doesn't add to your sense of pride in your place, in your community, or in your country. So I think it's about the dignity of labour and the pride that we get from being able to produce ourselves, create those good jobs, and, by the way, drive us towards decarbonisation and net zero, which I think is a big opportunity as well for showing that many of these communities were the cradle of the first industrial revolution. Let's make them the cradle of a green industrial revolution. And when I say that to the steel workers in my constituency, they're absolutely on board with it. They want to be a part of the solution. They don't want to be seen as a problem. They know that the only future for us is a cleaner, greener manufacturing sector, and with steel at its heart.
Okay, one of the things that has me shouting at the TV and radio is when I hear the phrase high skills economy, because it's so unrelated to the way our education system works, which is totally really focused on the high value of academic education rather than skills education. And, you know, so we heard an earlier speaker talking about people leaving their communities to go away, and often that starts with going away to university. What would Labour do about this issue of actually skills and giving skills real value and making it, you know, young people feel that a skilled pathway is just as valuable as getting, for example, a degree in classics or English from Oxford or Cambridge?
I completely agree with you, and I think it relates in a way to that first question, which is about the collapse of the manufacturing sector has sent a message to our young people, which is there aren't really any great opportunities in the areas of where you develop technical skills in order to have those job opportunities. So I'm going to go off to university and do media studies instead and hope to get a job in London and never come back, right? So that has to change. I think that there's a big piece of this which is around the lack of dialogue that takes place between local education institutions and the local private sector. So one of the things that Labour is talking about, and Kate Green is talking about, is convening, using local enterprise partnerships, or perhaps even creating a network of regional educational forums that bring together trade unions, businesses, and education providers, so that they're actually producing the kind of curricula that people need in order to connect the jobs and the opportunities. So I think that's a big part of it. I also think there's a case to be made for depoliticizing the curriculum. One of the things we've seen in the education sector for far too long is politicians meddling in the system, changing things around all the time, creating more and more bureaucracy for teachers. And I think there's a case for creating an independent agency that can actually take decisions and provide guidance on the kind of curricula that we need at a national level. And that should also be regionalized, so that's filtering down through the system and connecting up to the private sector more effectively. So that's some ideas, but I think you're absolutely right that until we have parity of esteem between academic education and technical education, we're going to be grappling with this problem for a long time.
Some of these ideas that I'm hearing around me today, I mean, it seems to me the obvious way to make them happen is for a form of politics that is more balanced, more coalition-based, rather than divisive and, oppositional, which is what we've got at the moment. Do you think there is a role to play for the electoral system in executing a different type of politics and bringing people together to find solutions together, rather than somebody comes up with a good idea and then the other person feels they have to oppose it simply because it was put forward by the wrong party?
Well, I'm a very strong supporter of proportional representation. I think that our first-past-the-post system is completely unfit for purpose. I think it creates this awful idea of safe seats which get left behind and ignored. Power and resources follow the votes when it comes to the way in which governments think. And I think it's been very bad for our economic model to have this winner-takes-all culture. And there's so many other reasons why first-past-the-post doesn't work. I actually think it's very bad for progressive politics because the progressive parties are divided. And for that reason, if you aggregate all of the votes that Labour has received since the Second World War, it's 40% of all of the public vote in all of the elections since 1945. The Conservatives have taken 41% of all of the votes since 1945. The Conservatives have been in government for 63% of the time. So I think that tells you all you need to know about this completely dysfunctional electoral system we have, both from a point of view of being democratic, but also from the point of view of the outcomes that it delivers to our communities. And it has, I think, been a big part of the huge divides in wealth and opportunity that we see in the country. The United Kingdom is the most divided country in terms of between regions, the wealthiest region being London and the southeast, and the poorest regions. It's got the biggest divide in the entire OECD. So that's for a whole range of reasons that we've talked about already in terms of manufacturing, in terms of skills and education. But a big part of it is also can be traced back to our electoral system.
Thank you. You raised Brexit, not me, so I'm going to come back to it. I mean, some of us are struggling to see anything good to have come out of Brexit yet. What role does Brexit play in regeneration and in Labour's making Brexit work?
Yeah, well, I think, George and I bear the scars of trying to get a deal through Parliament that we called Common Market 2.0, and it was about accepting the result of the referendum, taking the United Kingdom out of the political project, but leaving us very closely aligned with the single market. And I think that would have been the right thing to do, and I think Labour's decision to back a second referendum was a huge mistake for a whole range of reasons. But we are where we are now, and I think the first step for us as a Labour Party has to be to say we take the trade and cooperation agreement with the EU as a floor, not a ceiling. And what we need to do is drill down into it, identify the biggest weaknesses in it and what really constitute the biggest threats and risks to our economy, where is the friction and the barriers, and sit down sensibly with the European Union, on day one after winning a general election, and go through that and look at practical and pragmatic ways to resolve it. There are so many dysfunctionalities in the deal that need to be dealt with, and of course we've got the huge issue of the Northern Ireland Protocol, and I'm extremely concerned with the sabre rattling that we're seeing and the possibility that Article 16 will be triggered, and I think that could lead to the European Union suspending the entire trade and cooperation agreement. So we're back into the territory then of a no-deal Brexit, which I'm sure fills everybody in this room with a great sense of joy. So we've got to find a way of making it as easy as possible for us to trade. And one of the problems, I think, as John Mills said in the video, is we've got this issue of collapsing productivity. We don't export enough. If we have a trade deal, our biggest export partner is still the European Union. If we're not able to trade in a frictionless manner with them, it's going to have a knock-on impact in terms of exports and in terms of productivity, and you get once again into that vicious circle of manufacturing declining rather than being boosted, which I think should be the number one political priority of the government. So we've got to find a way of taking that TCA, making it the floor, not the ceiling, having those negotiations with the European Union, and I hope with better relations and better trust between the two partners, we can get a more pragmatic and constructive outcome.
And do you think you can sell that confidently to the people that you're part of Renaissance Labour? Is it Renaissance Labour? Which made me laugh because when I was, Frank Dobson, who was a friend of ours, always used to get over the old versus new Labour thing by saying he was heritage Labour. And now you're Renaissance.
Vintage Labour.
Vintage Labour, yeah. Now you're Renaissance Labour. But, I mean, can you sell this thing, this sort of softer Brexit, to the people you need to win back?
Well, I think a lot is going to depend on people's lived experience over the next year or two. And if enough people in the country come to the conclusion that you've come to, Fiona, that you're not seeing the benefits, and that we need to find pragmatic solutions which just ensure that our economy isn't being hit for six by all of this, then I think people would be going with the grain of the argument. I do think that I think that when I talk to my constituents, there is also a sense that we are living in a pretty turbulent world, and there is an increasing worry about isolation. And it just feels like a world that's not very good to be isolated in right now. And we saw over the summer with what happened with Afghanistan and the way in which the United States appears to be withdrawing. We've obviously left the European Union. And I think there is I don't think it's, people aren't sort of saying it top of their minds, but there's a gnawing issue at the back of people's minds, which is that we're starting to feel like and look like an increasingly isolated country. And this is not a world in which you want to be isolated, where we're seeing more and more great power competition. We're seeing the collapse in many ways of the multilateral system. We're seeing Putin backing Lukashenko to send migrants to the border of Poland, and 100,000 Russian troops massing on the borders of Ukraine. We're seeing China expanding its worldview, buzzing Taiwanese airspace over 300 times last year. So there's also something about, I think, needing an anchor in the world. And, we've left the European Union. That debate is done and dusted. But there are ways in which we can start to rebuild some of those bridges. And I do think that at some point the British people will say, okay, the debate about leaving the EU or not is done and dusted, but let's now be pragmatic, let's be constructive, and maybe some good old British pragmatism will be brought back to the foreground.
Do you feel that Labour's getting its message across to the public?
I think certainly over the last couple of weeks, the message has been getting across to people, if the opinion polls are to be believed. I think we need Keir's speech and the pamphlet that he produced before conference are absolutely in the right place for us. It is about rebuilding trust and reconnecting after a really turbulent period in Labour's history of the last 5 to 6 years. There are a lot of people out there who just not really sure what the Labour Party stands for anymore, who we stand for. And we have been fighting amongst ourselves for 5 or 6 years. I think that speech was a milestone in terms of saying we are now a party that is looking outwards. We are focusing on themes of community and good work and equality and of a society where we care for each other. And that's where Keir is coming from. That's what gets him out of bed in the morning. I think what we need to do now, and that's very much what the Renaissance project is about that we've been working on, is about boiling that down into a small number of compelling stories about the future of the country. Good jobs you can raise a family on, sensible management of the public finances, being really prudent with taxpayers' money, value for money is paramount, and a Britain that can stand on its own 2 feet, rebuilding our manufacturing sector so that we can reduce our reliance on very extended supply chains and actually begin to bring those good jobs and all of those skills and that research and development and the exciting opportunities for engaging with universities and innovation, those small, often family-run businesses that should be the backbone of our manufacturing sector. That's where we need to go with this now, so that we've got those kind of 3 or 4 very clear messages. You can call it a pledge card if you like.
Oh God, I was going to ask you, what would you put on the pledge card? That was my next question.
And that's where we need to go, and that needs to happen with the greatest possible urgency, because there could well be a general election in, well, a lot of people are talking about May 2023, but we need to be on an election footing right now, and that means we can't just sit back and wait for the Conservative Party to implode, which might happen. But that never wins elections. That never gets you more than 35% of the vote. We've got to make it absolutely clear to the British people who we are, what we stand for. We are the party of work and good jobs, and we're going to bring those good jobs back to your community. And I think if we can do that over the next 18 months, then we will be in with a very good chance of winning the next general election.
Well, since you answered my last question, I'm going to put a personal one. I'm one of those people who lost faith of the Labour Party and left after 40 years, and I still haven't come back. Why should I rejoin the Labour Party?
I think because you can see that we are now a credible party of government again, that we will look after taxpayers' money, we will invest where investment is required, we are passionate about bringing those good jobs and opportunities back to the communities that need them, and we are, this isn't just about electoral calculus. This is actually about the moral duty and mission of the party, because if we're not standing up for those people, then who are we? What do we even exist for? And I think we are genuinely, under Keir's leadership, we are coming back into that place. We've still got a long way to go. I mean, we've got to win 124 seats at the next general election in order to form a government without any other party. We need you back, Fiona. We need people like you back. Because
there's a small problem about my civil partner who's been expelled from Labour, so I'm not coming back till they let him back in.
Oh, right, okay, well, you can, I probably shouldn't comment for all sorts of reasons about on Alistair's current status as a membership or not of the Labour Party, but he should be back as well. It's absolutely clear, and we hope that we can rebuild that trust and bring people like you back into the party. We need you.
That would certainly be the big tent if we came back.
Indeed.
Thank you very much, Stephen Kinnock. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen, and thank you, Fiona, for setting up our debate with such clarity, and that's really helpful. So enough from us. It's now over to you. As those with a longer memory and a sad television watching history will remember, the votes have now been counted and verified, and we're now ready to tell you which sessions you can go to, and I need you to pay careful attention because we didn't know until 10 minutes ago which sessions you would choose. We have to do some sort of swift directing, and that's going to involve following these people in white t-shirts when we've told you which sessions are available to you, working out which one you want to follow and following them. And if you lose them, you may never find your session again. So with that warning to pay attention, I'm going to hand over to our very own answer to Davina McCall, Trin Gong.
I'm really sorry, I don't have a microphone. I hope I'm loud enough.
Okay, hello, now I have this. And so this is the second set of sessions. So people whose names are up there, you will be leading the session, so be prepared. Okay, so if we can go back to breakout session 1, this first slide, and I'll be calling down the volunteer and then you can kind of stand up if you want to go with them. So
Claire is in here. It should be in that pile, but if you're wanting to go to Claire Hazelwood Grove's session, you don't need to move.
You can just stay here in the lecture theatre. So Claire, here, on community power. Number 2 is Baroness Pinnock, looking at areas of deprivation.
You'll be following Lottie.
So if you're interested in that topic, please follow Lottie. She'll just be over here. And then we have Francis from Codec on councils and business rates with Kia. Bia Aloko on Global Britain, and you'll be following Jake. And then Hannah Davies on health inequalities, and you'll be following Jack. 1, 2 more, and then Ashok Gupta on the investment system, and you will be following Miles. Last one is Paul Goldsmith on left behind areas, and you will be with Maddie. So yes, if you want to just choose which session you're going to, then you can follow your volunteer.
Look at our gang. And I suggest you lead off the way, so grab your bags and follow the person.
Thank you very much.
The PPS for Michael Gove, and he'll be on in just a minute. So can I ask people to take their seats? So thank you very much. I hope you've all had an interesting couple of sessions. I've been sort of ducking into a few of them, although it was really hard because I was trying to get round as many of the sessions as possible. And I got stuck twice because it was just really, really interesting discussions going on. I wanted to reassure you that by bringing Big Tent and Radix together, one of the things it enables us to do is to take these excellent discussions and turn them to policy ideas that we can then present on to government. So first, to reassure you that we have not just taken notes and recorded everything that's been said in those sessions, and we will be writing them up, but there is an open invitation, particularly to those people who convened those breakout sessions, but actually to anyone. If there were ideas that came out of those discussions, or ideas that you've been prompted to have as a result of your discussions, that you would like to share with us, if you would be interested in turning them into a Radix policy paper that we can take back to share with government and with politicians, then please grab me during the drinks and tell me what you'd like to do. I'm looking around the room, I'm seeing some of our fellows here like Simon Mundy, who can tell you what a fantastic opportunity it is to write for Radix and the value of producing papers for us. And I would love to invite anyone here, but particularly those that were successful in the ballot, to use their success to reflect back what happened in your sessions and turn it into ideas. With that invitation, we have a short film.
Big Tent encompasses and welcomes people across political spectrum, political affiliations or no affiliations.
I'm Martin, I'm Chief Executive Trust, and I'm so delighted to welcome you all to Coventry. This is a city of pioneers and activists, innovators and peacemakers.
This is quite an important discussion, when we're talking about ending hunger and malnutrition.
I think the first thing to say is that you must acknowledge that you're part of the ecosystem of what's going on. You're not just floating around.
We can do something about this if we have the political will.
The space to have conversations, the space to share ideas, to exchange ideas and hear from some truly inspirational and thought-provoking people.
Wow, what a privilege to be next to all of you guys. People want the positive arguments as well. They want to know what it looks like.
I built a bursary. It created an hour of coding and workshop, video game creating for any child that qualified for free school meals. Yeah, this isn't just about the privileged and the well-off. This is about helping everybody have the opportunity to be inspired.
We need to think about the collective experience we can provide.
And ultimately, working on sort of large-scale projects that bring together that heat, that energy and that transport piece.
I'm here today as a Brummie to salute a place that makes history by inventing the future.
The kind of initiative that you're showing in hosting this kind of conversation, the openness, the fluency, the free exchange of ideas, across party lines, I should add, is something that happens perhaps too infrequently in our politics.
What you need is your passion and your ideas met with facilitation.
Let's make it exciting.
So we have to play to our distinctive strengths and build a system without the walls that perhaps caged the talent too much.
This has really opened up some new nascent diplomatic collaborations.
Thank you for bringing the Big Tent to Coventry.
I also want to say thank you to Ben, to Georgie, to Annie and to everyone in the Big Tent team who have come together to organise this.
A thank you to George Freeman, who established the Big Tent Festival, which I think is a great bout of creativity in the world of politics. So thank you, George, for bringing us all together.
It's not too late to change what we do.
So that was our Big Tent Festival 2021. For those that were there, I'm sure you'll agree with me that it was incredibly exciting and inspiring. And for those who weren't there, I very much hope that you will now want to be at Big Tent 2022. So where is that going to be? Well, for those that weren't paying attention when George broke our embargo, I want to introduce our next speaker. He was born and brought up by his mother in a deprived area of a town beginning with B. He began his working life with Tier Fund. For those that don't know it, one of the biggest and really the best international development agencies in the UK. He worked in Washington, D.C. with President Clinton's advisor, Reverend Tony Capolo. He was a BBC journalist, a graduate of the Operation Black Vote scheme and Labour's Future Candidate scheme. And in May 2016, he became the first elected mayor of Black African heritage of any European city. And having overseen the building of 9,000 homes, announced the development of a mass transit system, and brought Channel 4 to the city, he was re-elected in May. Without a single clue about where we're going to go, I would like to see if we can successfully, and this is my moment of fear, oh, fantastic, Marvin, successfully introduce the two terms Mayor of Bristol, Marvin Rees. Marvin, can you hear me? I can hear, I can see that you may be able to hear me, but we can only see your lips move. Gary, can we do something to unmute you?
There we go, it's done.
There you go, a proper interactive effort. Marvin, we are so looking forward to you telling us where we're coming for the Big Tent Festival in 2022. Marvin Rees.
Well, I'm really pleased to say that I've got a big echo there. I'm really pleased to say that you're going to be in Bristol on the 10th and 11th of June, and we are really looking forward to hosting.
Fantastic. Marvin, tell us a little bit about why you want us to come to Bristol and about what you're doing in the city.
So I attended a big event, contributed to a discussion last year, and I really valued it, really valued George hosting as well, and I'd met George before anyway with transport issues. I was actually on a community radio station being interviewed this morning, and when I shared that I'm not standing again for Mayor of Bristol, but one of the things I would like to leave, as well as lots of houses, is to have gone on a bit of a journey to have a better quality of civic discourse. I don't even just want to say political discussion, just the way we talk in general needs to be better. I think we're in a real danger. We all know we use these phrases a lot, polarized and siloed. I'd say one of the biggest dangers we face at the moment is oversimplification and single-dimensional ideas being applied to a complicated and contradictory world. And certainly, I say myself, I'm a fallen human being, and and if you could see inside me, you'd see all sorts of contradictions and hypocrisies. If you put 460,000 people together in a city and give it a couple of thousand years of history, you're going to find contradictions and hypocrisies and unintended consequences and all that. That's what we are as human beings, and we need a way of talking publicly that takes that seriously and recognizes it, and recognizes that sometimes good things can have negative consequences for some people. For example, there are no clean outs in the world, and with the Big Tent coming to Bristol, that's what it's about, and that's what I experienced. But I think it could be a real investment in Bristol, in the ability of Bristol and everyone else who participates in raising the need for that, and in our ability to begin doing it.
So, Marvin, tell us a little bit about what you've set out to achieve and what you're planning to achieve in what is another 3 years, 4 years left? 3 years.
Yeah, 2.5 years now. So in the name of those complexities and contradictions, I've actually tried to really take a step back, not from the front line, but in the argument. And I can go to any number of meetings where I'll get shouted at and people won't like what's going on. Although, to be honest, most people are quite civil because they see it's a challenging role. But I have been in situations and I said, look, you're looking at step 5 and the point of disagreement. Why don't we go back upstream and find out what we do actually agree on before we start, kind of saying, well, because you don't see the problem the way I see it, analyze it in the way I analyze it, solve it in the way I solve it, therefore you are an enemy. Let's not start there where we have to have exactly the same worldview. Let's go back upstream and see if we identify the city and its challenges in the same way. I do this a lot with our housing challenges when people tell me they don't want houses built here, they don't want them built there. All right, let's go back to basics. We're a city of 42 square miles. We're not getting any more for those miles. 42 square miles. We have a population of 465,000 people. We're going to grow to 550,000 by 2050. We have more than 15,000 people on our housing waiting list, over 1,000 households in temporary accommodation. 1 in 4 of our children living in poverty in the city, and we know that's been worsened. The vulnerabilities of many of the most vulnerable people have been, embedded through the course of COVID. We're a very unequal city. There's a startling reality here that in Clifton Ward, almost every teenager will go on to university, which is quite remarkable. When you compare that to in Bristol South in Hartcliffe, it's just 1 in 12. We're a city that's got a fantastic story to tell to the outside world, but that story overlays a lot of inequality. So my point is, we've got to solve those challenges, right? It's a moral responsibility, but also it's an economic responsibility. We need a skilled workforce. We need a physically well workforce that is resilient, will continue to go to work, won't miss days for back pain and depression. We need all those things politically and morally. So not solving those problems is not an option, but we have to solve those problems in the context of a climate and ecological emergency. So if you play that over into housing, I think delivering homes, regeneration, that you've been talking about, is one of the single most important policy tools we have. A warm home, a zero carbon home in a balanced community that people get to build relationships and put roots down. But now I've got people saying, yeah, but we've got an ecological emergency. How can you keep building houses? Well, it's not that we can't build houses. It's just that we've got 2 very difficult challenges that they both are important, but they're difficult to hold together sometimes. We have to build tens of thousands of houses in Bristol, but we also have to meet an ecological and a climate emergency. We have to do all those things at the same time. And that's the space we need to talk about how we deliver against those complex, interdependent, sometimes conflicting priorities that we must meet all at the same time. And and that's what we face as a city. And again, that's what I hope we can begin to touch on with the kind of big tent philosophy for leadership and thinking.
So Marvin, I'm going to ask you one last question. Our theme for today is effective regeneration, and we started with a series of I think 8 interviews with people answering one thing that they thought needed to happen to help along effective regeneration. You've now got 2 members of Her Majesty's government in the room. What is the one thing, and we only gave them a minute, so because you've said this is a complex subject, I'm going to give you a minute. What is the one thing you would want them to take away in terms of delivering effective regeneration in Bristol?
Predictable, dependable finance that is accessible to city leaders.
Fantastic. Got in 4 words, let alone in 30. Marvin, I cannot tell you how excited we are about coming to Bristol. It's a fantastic location for us. It's a great venue. I'm also really excited to discover whether you exist in 3 dimensions. But meanwhile, we've been really, really pleased to have you with us. And thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, Marvin Rees.
Take care.
Thank you, Marvin. No one more relieved to see him than Hannah from his office, who was otherwise going to have to stand in and do that for him. So thank you, Hannah, for your help in making that happen. So our final interview of the day involves our second speaker. We've heard earlier from Stephen Kinnock, and now we're going to hear from the Conservative side. And to speak with her interviewee, and I'll let her introduce him, will be Joanne Nadler. Joanne's a political journalist and author, former BBC programme maker and reporter. She told me, although I see she's left off her really key role as URY, University of Radio York producer when we were both at university together. She previously worked for the Conservative Party in the 1990s and served as a councillor in Wandsworth to 2014, where she chaired the Education Standards Committee. And she spent lockdown working with the Centre for Social Justice on a project with Sajid Javid, and is currently researching a project on the politicisation of schools. And to be in conversation with her will be Danny Kruger. So, Joanne, thank you very much. Danny, thank you very much. Come take your seats. I hope you're mic'd up.
I don't know which side we're meant to be on.
Wherever you like.
Choose.
Just going to make sure we've got some water before we get going.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
I seem to have a rather big glass. So are we all mic'd up and everyone can hear us? Thank you for your introduction, Ben. It sounded as though I was the main attraction here, but absolutely not. I think he left it to me to introduce Danny and to explain why he's so central to this agenda. Danny Kruger is the recently appointed PPS to Michael Gove, and as such is very much a lightning rod to the Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities, as it's now known. Now, he's only been an MP since 2019, but he's very much a seasoned Westminster politico, if I can put it that way. And he was a speechwriter to David Cameron. He has worked in think tanks. He's been a leader writer. But I think most importantly, in terms of this session, he stood aside from all of that to actually practice what he preaches, and around about 10 years ago set up a charity to help prisoners with rehabilitation, which he then left Westminster to run it full time. Danny is very much considered to be sort of a big thinker, a person of ideas. He's a man of faith whose considered opinions challenge the secular consensus. And he's recently published this very hefty and important tome, Levelling Up Our Communities, and he's also established something called the New Social Covenant Unit. And I think that's probably where I'd like to start, Danny. The New Social Covenant, what's different in your mind between what we might call a social covenant and a social contract?
Thank you, Joanne, and everyone, and to Radix Big Tent for having me. Enjoyed this journey of this outfit since George started some years ago. So the New Social Covenant is the term that Miriam Cates and I, so Miriam's another new MP elected in 2019, she represents a seat in Yorkshire, and we set this little outfit up which dedicated to the idea that what really makes us safe, happy and free as individuals is not just the freedoms and the liberties we enjoy, but the relationships and the memberships that we're part of. And what we really need to be safe, happy and free are strong families, strong communities and a strong nation. And that our individual identity is essentially relational. And I think as a civilization, and my party I think has been a part of this, in the lead in some respects, in this, our civilization has adopted an idea of human flourishing that is largely individualistic. We've developed a narrative around liberation, and that is necessary. I mean, what would we do without freedom? There can be no true flourishing without it. But really what we need is to belong to nourishing institutions that tell us who we are and give us agency and a sense of belonging. So what we're about, and I'll say it quickly, is we're not a think tank. There's loads of brilliant think tanks out there. What we do is try and support ideas from within Parliament and outside that strengthen families, communities and the nation, and it's cross-party. I mean, we're 2 Tory MPs who set it up, but we work with anybody, and we promote what people are doing in Parliament and outside, to try and shift the narrative a bit away from this quite individualistic mindset and towards this more relational and community-based idea.
So, levelling up and regeneration, there's been, I think, quite understandably, a lot of scepticism about the phrase levelling up and whether or not the government is sincere, whether or not the government can actually deliver on it. That seems to be partly because, for as long as I can remember, something approximating to the idea of levelling up has been centre stage politically. I mean, going back to John Major, there was sort of the idea of the classless society, and then we had this whole adventure into communitarianism, and of course the big society, which you were quite involved with, I believe. So what would you say is different in the approach of the government now, and how do you think you can reassure people that actually there is going to be some delivery now, and it isn't just a sort of slightly fanciful idea?
Well, you're right that it's an old priority, I mean, quite rightly. I mean, we are the most spatially unequal country in the developed world, and we have been for generations, I mean, literally generations. If you look back in the 1930s and the political debates then, they were talking about the distressed areas. And frankly, those are the same places if you look on the map. They're the places that were essentially left behind by deindustrialization. And we have tried, we, the political class, have tried all this time and over all those decades to do something about it. Meanwhile, of course, problems have been exacerbated by globalization. So you're right, this is not a new priority. And you're also right that Conservatives since the 90s, well, actually since the 80s with Michael Heseltine working on behalf of Margaret Thatcher in Liverpool and elsewhere, this has been a political priority. And throughout the Blair years it was as well, and significant amounts of money were spent on initiatives to try and address the challenges of deindustrialised towns. What's different this time? Well, partly it is, I mean, if you doubt our sincerity, then please don't, Joanne. I mean, you know, our whole political, you know, if you think purely about that politicians are cynical, which is, you know, a legitimate assumption, even if we were purely cynical, this would be our imperative. This is the majority that we won at the last election, was on the votes of people who've had enough of the orthodoxy that we can drive the nation's prosperity from the southeast and redistribute some of the fruits in the form of welfare payments, public service support to the places that aren't contributing to the economic growth in the way that the southeast is. This is a deeply wrong model. And rather than redistribution, we want equal contribution. We want every part of the country to be contributing to prosperity, as of course they can, should, and want to. And the agenda here, and what levelling up means, is a focus on the roots of prosperity, which is not, so it's not just about redistribution, and nor, by the way, much as our debates focus on these things, and I understand why, it's very much, we're not just focusing on the big infrastructure investments that are badly needed, talking about rail today, for instance, but there's all the focus on broadband, connectivity of all sorts, which is absolutely foundational to prosperity anyway and to levelling up. But crucially, and I think particularly relevant to the mission of Big Tent, it's about the social foundations of prosperity and what we might call the social infrastructure that places need and that are the real roots of well-being in a place. So we want to make sure that places can fulfill their identity, their pride of place, develop the local skills base, and once again be the towns that attract capital. And government has a big role to play in that, but ultimately it will be driven by the private sector and crucially by civil society.
I mean, from what I can tell, I was at one of the sessions earlier on, and if you look at the range of the things that has been discussed this afternoon, there are experts in this room on every aspect of what you've just referred to. I mean, your own report, it seemed to me to really cover a huge complexity of suggestions, from quite sort of big macro suggestions like increasing the use of technology to micro ideas about how you might involve people in communities that don't normally get involved with local government, and a lot of the things that have been discussed here today. But I mean, I do have to ask you a political question, given what's happened today with HS2 and the Northern Powerhouse. Northern Powerhouse was obviously something that was championed by George Osborne. This comes back to my point really about why should people take this government seriously on this, and did your department know about that announcement? How is it going to play in your department, do you think?
Well, I mean, the announcement is a very good one. There's part of £100 billion going into rail, and very significant improvements in the connectivity of northern towns. The decision that was made not to proceed with the plan that had been previously expected was on the basis of the fact that it was a 10-year-old plan and it would take 20 years to deliver. So what the government's doing is investing immediately in much faster improvements in the rail network of the north. So, I mean, I take your point. I think it's legitimate to say, we have been saying, following the plan made some years ago, originally commissioned under the coalition government. The reality has changed, as we've all become aware. The government has to think about the best use of taxpayers' money, and I think the decision has been made rightly to do the best we can and as fast as we can on the basis that the towns we're talking about need connectivity improvements immediately. But I don't think there's great value in, I mean, a point, what a great man he is, by the way, Marvin Rees, a huge admirer. Even though he's not my party, I'm rather disappointed to hear he's not standing again as Mayor of Bristol. He made a very simple point in answer to Ben about being able to rely on long-term funding commitments, and that really is necessary. And local government in particular, given the way we've structured finance in this country, are largely dependent on, increasingly, substantially dependent on central government money. They do need certainty about the money that's available. I don't think anyone should just say, I'm going to, automatically. It's understandable that people want to see the proof is in the pudding, and we will, these investments will be made now. We now have an actual deliverable plan that is being implemented. That is what was announced today. People can have absolute confidence it's going to happen. But long term, we will have to be judged in retrospect by whether we deliver the improvements in living standards and connectivity that people elected us to deliver.
Quite. So, I mean, some of this funding will come from the private sector, and some of it will come from the redistribution of grants that would otherwise have come from the EU. I mean, to what extent did you see, I don't want to get too hung up on Brexit, but obviously Brexit is the huge thing that's happened structurally since the big society was sort of moved off the centre of the agenda.
Yes.
So, twofold really, to what extent for you did Brexit offer a sort of a better way to regenerate potentially, and how now do you think that can be played out? Because in the earlier session with Stephen Kinnock, and we know, I suspect that quite a lot of people in this room were not Brexiteers, that there is a sense that nothing good is going to come out of Brexit,
yes.
And nothing good has come out of it.
Yes. Well, there's two immediate observations, two things that Brexit enables in this space. One is a meaningful industrial strategy. So we can reform the state aid regime so that the government can actually support industries in the regions that it wants to, rather than being confined by the EU rules on that. And the other, and we haven't yet seen the detail on how this will work, but the replacement for the EU structural funding, social funding, is the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, which is being tied up in the plans for levelling up quite rightly, because it's explicitly replacing a fund that was about supporting the regions which were less prosperous. So how the new system that we designed to replace the EU funding is really important and very exciting. And I think we can do better. I think we can have a better system that is more responsive and more reflective of the needs of local places. It's not done according to a algorithm in Brussels. And we can ensure that the funding supports the wider agenda that the government has around levelling up. So, and crucially, what we need, and what I think Brexit really was, whether you voted for it or not, I think most people would recognise the value of the slogan of Take Back Control. And to my mind, we will not have delivered Brexit really unless we allow people to take back control, not just from Brussels as the country's done, but from London. And unless we are meaningfully empowering communities with agency, with a sense of control over the communities they live in, an ability to influence local decision making.
But do you think the government's really prepared to do that? Because when Michael Gove appeared in front of one of the select committees in the last few days, I mean, one, he talked a lot about spending more money on all sorts of things, money which I presume for the most part is going to be directed from the centre. And the second point was that he wasn't interested in changing the way that business rates are allocated. I mean, and that could have been a route to giving local communities more control over the money they raise, perhaps increase their own competitive status.
Well,
so,
there's a great...
that seems to be a bit of a structural barrier.
Well, there's a great conversation to be had about business rates, and there's a review underway at the moment into that, so I think you probably didn't want to anticipate that. Certainly the business rate regime.
We'd like to hear more about that.
So would I, but that is underway. I mean, no doubt we need to think about the way business rates work. We've got to revive towns and town centres in particular with a better business rate regime. No, I mean, I'm convinced, and Michael made a speech in our party conference in Manchester, which was about enabling places to take back control. His vision of levelling up is explicitly about empowering communities. There is no single blueprint that can be imposed from above about how to support places. Paul Collier, I don't know if you guys have engaged, if Radix and Big Tent have had much to do with Paul, but I mean, he's absolute, George is nodding, he's the doyen of this agenda, and his vision is, his point he always makes is, there's radical uncertainty about what works when it comes to levelling up, or local growth, or whatever we call it. We do not know what a particular town requires, and if any of us sitting in London were to say what Huddersfield needs is this, what Gateshead needs is that, it would be outrageous. We've got prosperity's got to be driven from the place that needs it, and so Shared Prosperity Fund is a means by which we can empower places with funding that is national, but the power needs to be in the hands of those communities themselves, partnership of local government.
But who will make the decision on how those funds are allocated? That's really where the localism
absolutely, where does power reside?
Yeah.
This is our great question. Where does power reside? And there has to be accountability. We have to mitigate against abuse and dysfunction. But there needs to be, in my view, and I'm sure in the government's view, a real commitment to empowering local decision makers, and that is, to my mind, a partnership of local government, of the local business community, civil society, and ordinary people themselves who can be empowered. I think we are laggards in development of democracy. having been the forerunners in democratic innovation 100 years ago, we are now behind many other countries who do a lot better about how to engage people in decision making. So the significant ministers here who are going to help on that topic, but there are ways to involve people in decision making that I think could be very exciting in this century.
Yeah, and I think we should explore that a little bit. I mean, the government before the reshuffle was talking about reviewing local government and but perhaps I hesitate to use the word restructuring, but making some reforms to local government. And it strikes me that certainly, under the coalition government, there was a lot of talk about localism. How can you reconcile some of the contradictions that seem to come out of that agenda now, in that clearly there's been a lot of devolution, but if you devolve power to more directly elected mayors, and at the same time you're talking about bringing in sort of citizens' assemblies, potentially you've got a pressure on local government accountability, both from above and below.
Yes.
And I can see that could become quite complicated in terms of, where local people feel they should actually engage. Yes.
Well, you put your finger on a lot of the tensions. I mean, I should emphasise, I'm speaking for myself, not for the government. I'm not a minister, I don't speak for the government. But in the report I wrote at the request of the government last year, when we were going through this extraordinary kind of social and cultural moment of everybody being working from home or furloughed and suddenly having a role, stepping up and playing a very significant role in local communities in a way that many people hadn't before. I think we saw the power of people to take responsibility and to support their neighbours. And I think we need to build on that, and that's what I was writing about. And I think we've discovered an enormous latent reservoir of power in our communities. And we cannot think, in my view, that the only agency which should have any authority or responsibility in a place is the local councils as they're currently constituted. So I'd like to see us invigorate local government, but also to empower ordinary people and civil society. So how it's to be done is the great question for us all. I think we need a big conversation about where power resides and how to properly organise it. You do need accountability, ultimately through the ballot box. That's the only real source of sovereignty that we have, and decisions have to be made that are consistent with the democratic mandates, which is why government itself, central government, needs to always keep an oversight.
But will central government be prepared to sort of take risks? Because part of the localism agenda did see power being transferred to sort of below the local government level in terms of how schools were being run, local health authorities. It was quite radical in many ways. And yet at the same time, there was a complete squeamishness about this concept of the postcode lottery.
Yes.
I mean, if you can't allow things to fail in certain areas or to have different strengths and weaknesses, then how do you actually achieve excellence in practice?
Well, many people here will have a very good insight into that, I think. I mean, I would like to recover the energy of the big society, those early days of the coalition government, when there was a huge drive to empower communities and to innovate and to reform public services in a way that put power in the hands of people, frontline professionals and the users of services and local communities. It's fair to say, I think, that the public service reform agenda has been distracted over the last 5 years by other events. So now it would be good to get back to some of that reforming spirit.
I'm being waved at. Sorry, I asked you a question that required a longer answer, but I'm being waved at to wrap things up. And before we do end, I do want to ask you about housing, which seems to be so critical to regeneration. And this is a genuine question. When I was reading some of the things that you've written, I came across some really interesting stuff about trying to sort of break down the, my word, not yours, cartel of the big developers, and what you called direct funding into social housing. Can you just briefly tell us what you meant by direct funding? Because it sounds like we could be going back to local authorities.
Well, I think we do.
Housing.
I mean, put this again. This is me personally. In Wiltshire MP, we do need more social housing. We need publicly funded social housing, and we're getting it. I mean, this is happening all over the place. In Wiltshire, we're building council housing. Old-fashioned council housing is being built. I think that. I mean, I'll be quick for Ben's sake. This is me speaking. I think the government like it too. Community land trusts, which are community-owned developments that take the price of the land out of the price of the house. So they make housing affordable, but they are private sector, they're led by private capital, but they are owned by and accountable to local community groups. And this is the way I think to drive the housing, part of the way, there's many other ways as well, but this is a crucial element. In rural areas, in urban areas, this is the sort of housing that people like, because it is accountable to and owned by the community. So I think we can have the housing, big housing numbers that we need, increase in supply, without the resistance that naturally we come if we only expect the big volume house builders who don't frankly care about the community or the look and feel of a house or its appropriateness to a place. If we empower communities themselves, I think we'll get the housing we need.
That seems to be a very positive point at which to end. I've got a lot of other things I'd like to ask you, but maybe for another session.
Thank you.
Danny, Jan, that was both brilliant and incredibly frustrating, because I sort of feel we have literally only just started to scratch the surface of a whole series of issues. We could go on. I hope Danny and Jan actually will stay and join us for a drink, which we're about to offer people in a minute, and maybe we can dig back into some of those subjects. I know I was in one of the breakout sessions earlier where they were discussing local housing trusts as well, so you're not the only one who thinks there may be a solution there. We're coming to the end of the formal part of our summit today. I'm delighted to see we've been joined by our third Minister of the day, by Chloe Smith. And Chloe, if you didn't need the incentive of alcohol to stay for our drinks reception, Chloe is going to be our guest speaker at our drinks reception, and therefore it's the real pulling power for staying on. We'll be asking you to join us upstairs in the library in a moment. But before we do, we've given a man who needs no introduction because he's already had one from Fiona Miller earlier today, Stephen Kinnock, who's one of the trustees of Radix, the simple task of summing up just everything we've covered in the last 4 hours. And he said, does that mean I have to go to every session? And that was clearly impossible. So I hope you've managed to get some feedback. But Stephen, thank you very much for doing this. And I'll then say a few final words after you. But Stephen, thank you. And I mean, do stay there. We'll sit down there.
Well, I actually think George should join me with this because we are co-hosts, and it's so important as well to show that the Big Tent is a truly cross-party initiative, and I do hope that he will recover. He'll get over his very well-known shyness to just see if he can find his way to the stage. George, please join me. And also because the two breakout sessions that I did were both so fascinating that I completely failed to tear myself away from either of them. So I only did 2 breakouts. I know George did other ones, so maybe we can get a broader sense then of what to take away from them. The 2 breakouts I did was the one on global Britain and the one on people power, and I thought it would be a good opportunity to really do the kind of helicopter view, zoom out about what levelling up means in the context of global Britain. Is there a connection between global Britain and levelling up? How many slogans can you connect at one time as a government? And then on people power, where there was some very, very interesting thoughts around developing that capacity and capability, that question about where does this leave local government. I thought it was really interesting in terms of talk about citizens' assemblies and the like, and then the UK government, the devolved administrations, the elected mayors, and there's a risk that the poor citizens out there haven't got a clue by the end of it who they should actually be relating to. But if I had to sum it up in a word, I would use the word pride. Because whether you are talking about what I talked with Fiona a lot about in our session, which is the pride that good jobs gives you. In my view, the need for a modern manufacturing renaissance to bring prosperity and jobs back to the areas, as Danny so rightly said, we are the most spatially unequal country in the entire developed world. That is a cause of shame on our country. It's a shame on the successive governments that have failed to address that issue, and it's clearly demonstrated that there's something in the economic model that is broken, and we have to fix it. But if you think about what it means to people, it is the pride of a good job, the pride of being able to provide for your family, to be something where you have some status and esteem and self-esteem in your community, being part of something bigger, being part of a team, going to your office, your factory, your workplace, and feeling that sense of pride and dignity. So I think there's an economic driver in terms of the pride that levelling up should bring to our country. There is pride in communities, and I think that's so much of what Danny was talking about here, but that sense that you can feel proud when you walk down the high street. The high street isn't just betting shops and kebab shops, frankly, and charity shops. That there's something vibrant, there's something happening there. You get to know your neighbours, you're part of those social institutions, and how we build that. And then it is about pride in your country. It's about that patriotism that comes from feeling that your country is an open country, trading with the rest of the world, but doing that in a way that isn't allowing globalization to just rip through our communities and destroy them, which has been the catalyst for so much of the modern issues around so many parts of our country being left behind. The challenge has been there for decades, as Danny rightly said, but globalization has put turbo boosters on it. So I think it's about pride. And if we can give that sense of pride through work, through community, and through nation, then I think we're really onto something, and that is what I think all of us in Parliament have to strive for. Over to you, George.
Well, Stephen, that was beautifully put. I think there's a spirit in this room that I'm going to just try and capture, and I'm looking at these paintings and sort of cognizant of the building we're in, and it speaks to an age when this country was this spirit of what we're trying to nurture here today, a spirit of municipal pride, of a deep belief in the power of mayors like Marvin and Andy Street in Coventry in the summer, and the other mayors around the country, that people's pride in place that you've spoken about, Stephen, that Danny's spoken about, that is actually a common theme of all good politics, harnessing people's pride in place. There is no think tank really for that. And government, despite our best efforts, very often we put out the flame of people's love and their pride of place through well-intended interventions. And I say that as a Minister of the Department for Business Innovation and Industrial Strategy, where if we're really going to create an innovation nation, it'll be by unlocking lots of innovation economies around the country. To me, an innovation economy is an economy in which people are allowed, encouraged, supported to take risks in pursuit of opportunities in places. And my department needs to be better at thinking about that ecosystem of risk, security, affection, place, and pride. But there's something else that I think these people, these great Victorians, if they heard us today, they'd say, well, no wonder you've got a problem. You've massively centralised. You've created over the last 6 or 7 decades a huge top-down machinery of government. And you're trying to do stuff to places without helping and encouraging places enough to do it for themselves. And I'm conscious that, Danny, in your introduction earlier, somebody mentioned that you're a man of the cloth, I mean of the church. But I said to my vicar the other day, look, my dream church combines the sort of heritage and aesthetic of the conservative church, the anger of the liberal church, and the welcome of the evangelical church. And my perfect political party would combine the Labour Party's communitarian, deep-rooted commitment to community and to pride of people in place. You only have to go to County Durham and see that pit village identity. It would take the Liberal Party's distrust of the big state and the Conservative Party's belief in civic and entrepreneurial energy. If we could merge that into a movement for real place-based renewal and regeneration, I think we could really pass the test of time and look these people in the eye and say, we're doing it again. And I think that's what the Big Tent Radix merger is about. We're trying to combine a radical think tankery about pulling together the best ideas, not to be a think tank in London with very expensive offices that then becomes beholden to big money, but a think tank that's connected to the communities around the country, to the leaders of places, and to give you a forum to help shape thinking with ministers. But crucially, through the Big Tent, to convene leadership in place and in London, to bring leaders of place to London, bring ministers together, and to light that flame. And we started today agreeing that you can accuse this government of many things, but lack of ambition isn't one of them. And the levelling up agenda isn't just about trains or digital or connectivity, important though they are. It is actually about trying to tackle a systemic, structural, political failure of the machinery of government in this country, that we have snuffed out that flame in too many places. And I think you've heard today a cross-party, genuine commitment to lighting that flame and to trying to get that flame of hope burning in lots of places around the country. It can't be beyond the wit of our politics. And I don't think we have to abandon our different traditions. And I think what you've seen here today is a commitment to that idea. Please, if you think this is a noble endeavour, help us in the next 3 years. I say this as the founder of Big Tent rather than minister, help government. Because in the end, we're going to need those flames and those communities around the country. And going to Bristol next year is a big move, because we want to help Marvin get that community moving and show a commitment to make change happen. We don't just want to be a talking shop, we want to be mentoring young entrepreneurs, funding social enterprises, setting up community interest companies, supporting innovative community land banks and housing trusts, being entrepreneurial and helping local entrepreneurs to make the change and be the change. That, I think, is something our politics value needs. And Ben, thank you again and all the team for putting this together.
You couldn't sum up either the day or the mission better than that. I don't want to keep you from your drink, so I am just about to invite you to make your way upstairs to the library and join us there for a drink and for some further words from Tony. Just before I do want to say a couple of words of thank you, particularly I want to thank all of our white-shirted volunteers who have seen directing you around. I hope I remembered you all. It is the first event that we've done since we fully merged the Radix and Big Tent teams. So I want to say thank you to the Radix team from which I come, of Annie, and who does our communications, and David, who is our superb policy director. By the way, if you want to see some of the work that David and the rest of the teams do, as you go out, I hope you'll have the opportunity to pick up some samples of Radix's policy papers. And that will give you a sense of the shape and the quality of the work that we've done. I want to say thank you to Eve, who's been managing the front desk, to Trim, who we terrified with the voting system and who managed to deliver on it. And in particular, I've had a fantastic time working with Georgie, sort of formally for the first time from Big Tent, who frankly should be the one up here because she's done all of the work to make this happen. So Georgie, thank you. Make your way upstairs to their spectacular library and let us give you something to drink. See you later.